Everyone, and welcome to Of God in Mind podcast. And with me here tonight is Jacob,
G'day.
Adam,
Hello all.
and Reggie.
Hello.
And today we are going to be discussing evangelism and communicating ideas, essentially, in more general stuff. Specifically, science communication and religious communication and so forth. And as you can probably tell by this article, I'm flicking up and down. First off, we're going to start by discussing this little fight, I suppose you'd call it, that popped up a couple of weeks ago, where basically it was reported that there'd become an unofficial policy in Queensland education that tries to ban references to Jesus in the primary schoolyard. Now, it's worth noting that this was never government standard. This statement here, which you can pause and read if you're interested, about that the government says is basically just there's been no change. We have no change in policy. We don't even have policies on this kind of thing. It doesn't, and that they continue to support religious education in schools. That's the government policy. Whatever happened here, it's nothing to do with them. If anything happened here, I have to admit it came up rather quickly and left rather quickly. And with only a couple of sources, so it's hard to know if there really was anything there, if there was one school somewhere that said something that triggered something. It's hard to know. But anyway, basically, we're just using this to talk about why would something like this even happen? So why would people think to crack down on people talking about Jesus and about Christianity in schools? So what do people think?
I can repeat what I said before we started recording, which is I usually don't like anything that tries to control people's speech. It sounds a bit Orwellian, but then we have freedom of speech, but we also have laws against hate speech because that has malicious intent. I don't really see the benefit of trying to control people's, discussing religion. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this.
So, on this one, I think a bit strange, and honestly, we know there's no legislation coming out of this, but just merely there's a sentiment that's being put forward. But people feel really strongly about it. I don't really see how this benefits, or at least, like, for me, it doesn't really. Even that wouldn't necessarily stop proselytization if that's what the risk that they're trying to prevent is, because me as a Christian, like, I live my faith out because I want to, and it's not just by words or buzzwords. It's not like it's by actions about my belief in Jesus and understanding the Bible. Now, in one sense, by making that some taboo, you've actually almost like given it a lot more value, almost, or at least given, like, this legislation makes it kind of a very publicly seen, taboo thing to do or talk about, which in some places has actually made it more interesting to investigate for some people. I don't know if that's the result they want or what they're trying to achieve. That's what I really want to know. And that's probably why there has been no legislation against it up until then. So I don't really know what they're trying to achieve with that, other than not hear stuff that's potentially personally challenging. I don't know.
As Jesse said to begin with, the government released a statement essentially saying that the policy, as it has always been for decades, and that it might have just been a single school or something that sparked this. And the Church and State article, which Jesse, I believe, showed, and he'll probably link to,
Nah, I showed
is
the Australian one.
Oh, the Australian one. Okay. I can only assume that the issue arose out of wanting to, I guess, have a diversity of religious views in schools. I'm like spitballing here, but I mean, I can imagine that if you've got a diverse school, or there's certain minority religious groups at the school, you don't want anyone to feel intimidated by the majority group. I mean, I'm not advocating that you should stop people talking about core aspects of their identity and their views, but I mean, that's all I can see about it, that it's, if everyone around you was talking about a completely different religion, you might not feel as comfortable as you would otherwise.
Funnily
That's-
enough, at least my experience in the state system, Christianity is a minority religion. In state system, I mean, like, in terms of actively practicing, like we discussed in our census episode, people, calling themselves Christian on the census as opposed to actively believing in death and resurrection of Jesus, that is a minority belief.
I would argue against that, but then I only have anecdotal evidence of my upbringing in the public school system, where basically once a semester we would be put into a hall and have a priest talk to us about Jesus, and they'd hand out tiny Bibles to all the students, and that was my only exposure to religion throughout high school.
I mean,
Handing Bibles to someone doesn't make them a Christian, so there would be people who don't believe the Bible that were handed one.
Yes,
sure.
I think
I
what
mean,
Jacob
I guess
is
at the very
saying is
least,
that,
though,
like, it is a state
Sorry, go on,
religion,
Jesse.
it is deeply tied to, like, European culture, but it's
I mean,
a
our
lot of that
holidays
is
are
just
based around
history and
Christian
culture.
holidays.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we do in culture, and the practice of those beliefs doesn't really actually line up with Christian thinking and morality.
Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying is, like I said in the census episode, the people who put Christian on the census are not the people I'm talking about as being a majority minority. It's that whatever it is, 5 roughly percentage that actively are engaged with the church community and belief in Jesus as their savior in a very active faith relationship. That is a minority group. You won't see many people share a faith they don't have actively. You know what I mean? Um,
sure, I guess my point was more about that Australia is just on aggregate, I guess,
Identify
probably
yourself as
culturally
Christian, yes,
culturally
as
Christian.
whole. Yes, culturally, yes.
And so, if there's Christian evangelism happening in the schools by, I guess, the kids who aren't Christian or culturally Christian, may feel at odds with their own views or identity. Again, I stress that I'm not suggesting that we just tell everyone to keep their faith to themselves for when in public, but that's my guess as to maybe where the thing came from, the whole issue.
Yeah, that would sort of be my guess too, that it's around making sure that people don't feel pressured by that. Because we, like I said, our culture and a lot of that identity is tied around Christianity, and we aren't the only culture that has that, where religion and culture are tied up. Even though I'd imagine a lot of those religions also have the same sort of debates around that we do as Christians, that often the culture practiced by the country and so forth isn't actually in line with their teachings and so forth.
I mean, I guess it's a fine line because I think France was one of the first countries to ban the burqa, but that's because it wanted to kind of stop any outward showing of religion. So if people were wearing a cross and a necklace, they have to tuck it under their shirt and stuff. So it was like to kind of equally, I want to use suppress, maybe a better word, but to just try to, yeah, have less outward showing of various religions because it could incite, you know, some people might get annoyed with particular faiths or whatever. I guess that was a motivation for France. I think it was France that was doing that.
I mean, it's a bit of a strange one though, because like there's no requirement in Christianity to wear a cross. Whereas in like take it a large portion of Islamic belief, at least those that take it very seriously anyway, the burqa is kind of important.
No, the way I understand it is it depends on the country. Like Iran and stuff, it's mandated, but based on the religion, it's a choice. You're kind of guilted into wearing it because of social pressures.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's just kind of like, it's a modesty teaching. Women should be not focused on appearance and should cover appearance as much as possible for like to remain modest, to remain and to help keep people around them focused. I'm trying to put this as diplomatically as possible. Basically to stop men from having improper desires. And the actual form of that is kind of determined by the country and the culture. Like, I don't think it mandates a foot to toe, like a head to toe covering burqa. It's just some sort of head covering and maybe even some kind of veil. Hence why you have things like the hijab, which is it's probably the most common form of this, where they just cover the hair, but the face and everything is still quite visible.
But I guess the point is, how is the motivation of France doing that different from this case of trying to stop children talking about religion?
Yeah, I think, like, this is just a guess coming up with this while looking at it and thinking of France's history. I'd imagine they're kind of trying to avoid the sort of situation you have with America, where America has just, religion and politics are separated, that is separated from our foundation, anything goes for it. And then they sort of de facto ended up as a Christian nation with a rather rigid set of policies around that. France has kind of tried to legislate to enforce the opposite of that, a neutral, clean slate country with probably, I'm not sure that's the best approach either, to just enforce lack of offense by causing offense.
Yeah.
I guess I've also, sorry. Oh, do you want to go?
No, you're right.
Okay, no, so I was reading about this article about stopping children talking about religion. And I think I've just come to the conclusion that I would consider religion a mature topic, because we've all experienced this ourselves. We were raised one thing as a child, but then when we had some sort of internal reflection, we identify as a different thing. So I don't know, maybe because like if children between the ages of 4 and 12 are talking about religion, do they fully understand it? Or are they just kind of repeating whatever their parents say, I guess? But that could be applied to a lot of other things.
Yeah, that's sort of like, it's true. Children don't often fully understand it. And that's why things like in the Baptist church, we don't baptize children. They have to be of an age and suitable understanding to know what they're getting into before we'll baptize them and make them part of our church. But at the same time, there's a lot that children don't understand. So like, how much are you going to police this? Can children not talk about guns because they don't really understand guns? Can they not run around with toy guns and stuff? honestly, this might be a good idea too. I'm trying to think of like better examples. Just of it being that there's a lot children can't really understand, but how are they going to gain understanding if we just keep them away from anything that they don't understand? Like, you could even apply this to sort of,
Any taboo topic, to be honest,
yeah,
to young children, like the birds and the bees talk. When is that? When does school kids get given that one? If not by their parents, etc. So there's plenty of topics you can actually live into that. Regards to religion, like some of the examples, I guess is how far do you take it? Let's say some kids go to a Sunday school or a youth group or something, and just talk about very basic, brief, moral lessons from a talk. Is that off limits, or is Easter, Christmas stuff off limits? Like things that, like that sort of thing, which isn't even trying to like condemn people to hell by fire and brimstone. Like, is that really necessary to censor? I don't know. I don't think that's necessary to censor, because like even as a kid, like I met people of other religions, and I found it interesting, even though I necessarily didn't agree with them, even in like that 11, 12-year-old age when I was playing soccer and doing scouts. You know what I mean?
and I mean to sort of relate this to our other example from before. Children don't often understand the significance of where they're from or their culture or other things that we sort of like with that sort of link between culture and religion. Are we also going to not allow children to talk about the fact that, oh, I'm an Englishman, I'm an Aboriginal, I'm an Australian or something, until they can fully understand what that means, what their country stands for, and that?
Yeah.
Like, I think gist of it is we all think this probably shouldn't be something legislated against. You probably shouldn't legislate, at least within reason, what children are talking about on the playground.
Oh yeah, no.
Even if there's
Agree
some
with that.
things that you perhaps should watch. Like, for example, talk about drugs or suicide or various other things that could lead to being harmful. And it's probably worth noting that the motivation behind this legislation mightn't be some all bad, evil hate for Christianity trying to extinct us. It could just be, well, maybe there's children there with a different gender identity or a different religion, and we want to not have them be pressured. We want to not have them have to deal with these difficult questions. Like, misguided though it might be, it probably stems from good intentions, like a lot of things. I think a lot of people are too quick to just think everyone hates them. Alright, so moving on. So, we're both involved in different, like all of us are involved in sort of different types of outreach, I suppose you could say. In the case of me and Jacob, we believe it is important to share Christianity and what Christ has done for the world, for everyone, for us personally, and so forth, and his teachings with the world. And you and Reggie do some sort of science outreach, which I'll get you to tell us more about in a minute. So I guess the question would be, why do we do that? What's the importance? But probably best to start off by you guys telling us just like a brief summary of what science outreach is and what you intend to do with it.
Adam, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, it takes many forms, but essentially it's just a manner of science communication. And you'll present to different audiences. I mean, related to what we've been talking about, Reggie and I often do it with school groups, talking to them about astronomy and physics and space. But you can also do it with, adults or science enthusiasts. I mean, you tailor it to the audience. But essentially, it's just having the experts or those who are more familiar with the fields speak about the topic in such a way that it is more easily understood by the layperson, or maybe an enthusiast, but you want to strip it of most of its jargon, make it appealing, make them understand why it's important, why we do such a thing, what the benefits of it are, but being realistic about it, and essentially you want it to be entertaining and fun as well. So at one end of the spectrum, you have a lecture that you're just sitting through, and it's not very engaging, it's very one way. Whereas at least when I try to do science outreach with a group of kids, I try to be, ask them questions and see how they respond and get them thinking about things.
I guess the main point of when you and I do outreach is trying to teach people to think like a scientist. You ask them particular questions to lead their thought in a certain direction, or explaining things.
So why do you feel that's important?
Critical thinking is important in life in general. It's how we look at the news, really. The whole fake news stuff. You have to think about it critically. Is this actually real? Why could it be fake? That's how we think about science as well. You just gotta think about the problem critically. I think that's something that people just lack in general. But sorry, there was something I did tonight, which is trying to explain how astronomy came from astrology. I like to have people see the big picture. Sometimes when people come and they're like, astrology is ridiculous and stupid. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But when you look at the roots of it all, you can kind of see how astronomy came from astrology. And you shouldn't forget that. And I think it could be the same thing with how religion has crept into certain aspects of our life. Why don't we eat pork? Well, it's hard to preserve and people get sick from it. So that could have been why it's such a fundamental thing for certain people.
It's
Anyways,
also just about, it's also about making it accessible. I mean, there are varying degrees of quality to, I guess, science education in schools. I mean, on one end, you've just got as I said before, a lecturing style where it's here's a bunch of facts, memorize them. And you don't learn of anything of the process or the wonder or the people behind it. Whereas something that we try to do in science communication is, make it accessible and make people understand that, there are human beings behind this and the reasons why we do it, why it's important. And perhaps instill, a love of science, or at least an appreciation or an understanding of it in the people that we're speaking to. And we've touched on this in previous episodes, but in terms of understanding science, I mean, maybe it's not so important for astronomy, but I mean, all aspects of science are connected, and it's connected to policy making. So if you have an informed public about, say, climate change or vaccinations, and they're more likely to make informed decisions. And having said all that, I can see there's probably going to be a lot of parallels in terms of science outreach, in terms of being an expert and speaking to people who aren't so familiar with the topic, making it accessible, versus what the two of you, JC and Jesse, are going to talk about shortly, I imagine.
Correct. So, Jacob, why do we do outreach? Ooh, I just died.
Yeah. So, lots to talk about there, actually. Firstly, I actually do support science outreach as well. I am a scientist, although undergrad degree only, like these guys who have gone a lot further. But I think science is awesome, and I do enjoy talking about it. However, I think Jesus is super awesome, and I really enjoy talking about him. But for a very different reason. For me, he's my personal savior, but also I have a relationship with him, through God, through him. So that, to me, is what gives me my joy, my peace, everything in my life. And why not share about that? Like, as a physicist, I really enjoy talking about all the cool things and how the world works. You know, but I prefer talking about who made it all and why it was made. Like these, that to me is what I really love talking about, and I would love to see more people understand that too, understand the same joy as I have. Because I think it's pretty cool. It's awesome. It's like, I don't because of Jesus, I don't have to fear death. That's really, really awesome. I want other people to experience that too. For those that didn't know, Christian faith, you don't get brownie points by doing X, Y, Z things or outreach. So it's just have love for people and a response to what Jesus has done. That's as simple as I can make it.
Pretty good summary. I agree. So, how does this go wrong, I suppose? And I'll ask this to both of us, like both our groups here. What are some ways we see in which we think outreach isn't being done well?
I guess the obvious way is well, we have lots of religious schools come up, and that's fine. It's just, I guess, when some people take the Bible quite literally, and I guess it depends on your interpretation of it. Like I've recounted the story before about how one of students' mothers was a bit confused about how we can observe the universe way back 13 billion years ago, because of their literal interpretation of the universe being 6,000 years old. Other than that, it's usually fine. At least that's my experience. But you, Adam?
There's a phrase that comes to mind, which I've originally heard spoken by science communicator Cara Santa Maria. As an Australian, I have to make sure to say her first name correctly. Which is never underestimate, I think I'm going to say this right, never underestimate your audience's intelligence, but do underestimate their vocabulary? Or something, essentially the gist of it is like, don't assume that your audience is unintelligent, but do make the assumption that they don't understand the jargon. And so don't be surprised when you're talking to someone and they're able to follow along, but they're probably not able to follow along when you're throwing out terms like double-lined eclipsing binary, for instance, which is a little bit jargony. So essentially what I'm getting at is science communication, or just outreach in general, goes wrong when you are condescending. I guess, yeah. Condescending, or you don't respect the intelligence of the person you're speaking to. Because the idea is you're trying to have a discussion with the person, or you're trying to show them what's so great about science, or in your case, Christianity, and you want to make them appreciate it, show them like how cool scientists are and how wonderful the universe is, and you're not going to do it by saying, "Ha! You're wrong. You're so dumb. Let me tell you why you're wrong." You immediately close the door on that discussion when you do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a lot, like that's a good sort of rule of thumb for Christians to follow as well. Like one of my big things is we use a lot of jargon, even simple things that are very fundamental, like sin, Christ, all these terms that are so familiar to us that we just sort of use them without thinking. Someone can just have no idea what's going on there, or even have the wrong idea about what's going on there, and that can lead to all sorts of complications while you're talking to them. Like, for example, Jacob mentioned earlier that it's not, like, Christianity isn't about being good enough, it's not about doing good things and to get the best reward in heaven. It's about uh, it's about what Jesus has done for us in making us good enough, in giving us this way to live in the way that God wants us to. So often if you just talk about people, tell them to, okay, turn away from sin and follow God, they're not going to really know what that looks like. So by getting rid of a lot of this jargon, even stuff we might not notice, and just sort of, like, you might have to use 5 words, you might have to use 2 sentences to explain a concept, but often it's better to do that than to be brief. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in some of the evangelism stuff I've been a part of is we come to it with sort of our sort of ideas of what people think and understand before doing that. So we'll know that they follow a particular worldview, they're atheist or they were Catholic or come from a Hindu background or whatever. We just put them into the, oh okay, here's what I know about that religion or worldview, and let's assume that they know that, and then you start sort of talking about that. Or worse, you don't listen to them at all and you just go ahead with some sort of pre-planned thing that might have zero relevance to them at all. And in fairness, a lot of the time this is about, like when I've seen it, it's kind of nerves. People are real nervous talking to people about this stuff, this big important stuff, to people they barely know, if at all know. So they just kind of go with, okay, here's what I know, let's give my little speech. But you make a mistake when you're not listening to your audience, when you're sort of not thinking about, okay, what things are they understanding about what I'm saying, what don't they? What things sound like ideas that they might already have and what don't? Because that can make a lot of difference, especially making sure that people aren't just feeling like they're being preached to or looked down upon. Oh, you think that? And I think this is definitely something for science as well. Like, similarly to Jacob, I like science, I like Christianity, but a lot of people in Christianity, just like in the general public, don't know a whole lot about science, and they can just, and I think there's a lot of scientists too who just have this view that anyone who believes in Christianity is ignorant savages who are afraid of bed at night and so need a father figure. So you can sort of end up with all these beliefs. Like, people don't like being talked down to and given a lecture on various things, especially when it becomes clear that the other person really doesn't care what they think or say anyway, just wants to give their little speech across. So that's something to watch out for, that we aren't doing, that we're hearing people and that we're thinking that they are also intelligent, that they also have good reasons to believe the things that they believe. Like, people we talk to might have had bad experiences with the church. They might have had various or they might have had various emotional experiences that make them believe in a certain other belief system or whatever. It's about listening to them and learning why they think certain things, that we can sort of really that we can really teach them God in a way that makes a difference to them, like he makes a difference in our own lives.
Yeah, so what I found, I just really enjoy doing as a method, I guess, just simply is actually listening a lot and asking people, so where are you at with your faith, if you have one, and just listening, like, the reasons why they do or don't have a faith, or what their faith journey is at that moment, and just listen to it. You hear reasons why they do or don't believe certain things, and even those who are Christians and believe stuff. It's like, you get talking to them about other issues and things, and for example, like, but let's say we use an example previously raised, that believing they're for 6,000 years old. Well, we both believe the Bible, right? Yeah. Well, how about we look at Genesis? Does that really prescribe that? Now, that may not be in the first conversation I have with this person, but it may be conversation down the track. Particularly if they believe mostly of the gospel message, But just a few things of Christianity, it's like, well, let's make sure we read the Bible the way it was written with the intent that it was. And things, for those that don't know, the Bible doesn't explicitly say the over 6,000 years old. Just a heads up.
That was calculated by someone, wasn't it?
If you add up a lot of ages, it does point to an age around that time, but that's a super literal thing. And my view of the point of those verses right at the start of Genesis are talking about the authorship of creation, not the chronological date of creation. If you know what I mean, like the point of it isn't they're missing the point. You know, to overstress something when it's what's really saying is God's the author. How it was made is another thing, but that's going down a different line of conversation. Essentially, it's sharing faith is, and I guess we call evangelizing, is to me sharing my belief in keeping true to the Bible. For those that believe or call themselves Christians, it means bringing them straight to the Bible so we can talk about a common ground. But for even those that are still investigating what Christianity stands for and things, often it's a really lot of listening and I'm just really interested to hear where they're at and why they do or don't believe certain things. Because you can, like, as you know, with science, you can actually come to the right conclusion through a mistaken methodology. Is that right?
All the time. But yeah, essentially meet people where they're at.
Absolutely.
And
make sure it's always consensual as well. Like, you know, if someone's like feeling uncomfortable, doesn't want to talk, you don't force the issue.
Of course, I mean, it's communicating. It's a two-way street. And you're not gonna, if your intent is to get people on your side and thinking Christianity and or science is cool, you're not gonna do that by, you know, making an enemy of them or putting them offside.
Well, this is kind of touched on our last topic, I suppose, that was planned about being a bit practical and what are some tips that we can do while we're doing this. What are things we can do, what are things we can't do. So just if people have anything to add to that, let's talk about that.
I'm gonna mention what Adam was saying. It's like, have a discussion as opposed to lecturing someone. That, like, you're on equal footing and you're kind of like guiding people by asking the right questions and leading the discussion somewhere. I think that's a great way to teach people. Or to just talk about certain things. Discuss them as opposed to lecture.
Essentially echoing what Reggie said. You want to engage with them, with the people you're speaking to, be it, you know, adults or kids. I mean, if you're speaking to lots of different people, you might find that you're repeating yourself, but you'll hone your message over that. And by doing outreach and by speaking to people at different levels, you'll inevitably get good with using, you know, analogies and similes. It's like, all right, how do I explain spectroscopy to kids? It's like, oh, well, it's, you know, we're splitting the light up into its colors. And just talk about things at a simple level. And you'll just acquire a repertoire of such examples you can pull out. You'll get better at it as you go along. And especially with kids, they'll throw questions at you that might stump you, that you hadn't heard of before, but that only benefits both of you.
I fully agree with that one in particular. I think that's one of the biggest, most helpful things in terms of investigating, well, having grown my faith is, you know, asking questions that are difficult, and then answering them from my life, from the Bible. You know, like I've said before on previous of these podcasts, is like I've actually had to thank atheists, those that don't believe in Jesus, for asking tough questions I didn't know the answer to, because helped me investigate my faith deeper. And I think that's really important for every Christian to not just blindly accept something, because that what sort of relationship is that? Like, I think engaging with the person of Jesus in prayer, Bible reading, and fellowship with other Christians is really, really important as a Christian. So, to me, I think that's like one of the best parts is being able to engage with these thoughts, ideas, and communication. Yeah, and of course, I think like we're all passionate about certain things, and whatever you're passionate about, do so respectfully. Like I think the main reason I like to evangelize isn't to get any sort of euphoric experience myself or to promote myself as whatever it is. It's I want other people to experience this for themselves, and because it honors God, because that's what He wants to.
Yeah, and so my advice is kind of, and you'll probably find this a bit odd for people who know me in the fact that I am literally a stoic in philosophy. But remember the importance of emotion in discussing this. Like, this is probably more true for religion than for science, but there's probably some element to which it's true there too. But we're Christian often for reasons beyond just pure logic, for things that we see God has done in our life, for difference He's made. And people often aren't Christians similarly for religious reasons. Not for religious reasons, for emotional reasons. It's often experiences or their feelings on certain things or how they've seen people treated that lead them to either turn their back on the faith or just be hostile to it to begin with. So your own emotions have a place in sort of telling people about what Christ really means to you. And that part at least is true in science as well. Like, having a passion for science, people can respond to that. People can see, oh, this means a lot to this person. This is a great, cool thing. Like, I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson would be quite the communicator he was if he was just deadpan all the time, giving nothing but facts. So, these things can be an asset in your communication. But of course, they do have their place. You've got to... If we go too much into the realm of emotion, we get into the sort of yelling, screaming matches that characterize so much of the discussion, especially between science and religion and other things these days. So sort of... Emotion can be a good thing too, but moderation in both emotion and in reasoning.
I guess to add to Jesse's points, using, I guess, emotion, as you put it, is valuable in science communication, but probably more in certain aspects than others. It's useful in, like, highly partisan or emotionally charged issues. Like when you're trying
vaccination or climate change.
Yeah, when you're trying to speak of the merits of vaccination or the reality of human-caused climate change, you again want to tailor what your message to your audience. I mean, I've heard this in the context of climate change discussions, but you're not going to get through. I mean, you might get through to certain people by saying, just throwing out facts and figures, like, oh, the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased so and so much since the Industrial Revolution. Like, that might get through to someone. Another person, though, they might be skeptical of climate change, but say they really care about the Great Barrier Reef, or they're from a family of farmers, and you can speak to the reality of how climate change will affect agriculture in terms of vaccinations. You can speak about, say, herd immunity, or with a personal anecdote. I mean, these science isn't personal anecdotes, but they have their place, and in outreach and in science communication, it's as much fact as it is storytelling. So you want to, again, as I said, meet people where they're at, see what the best way to get through to them is, the best way to engage with them, and follow that through.
Yeah, I suppose that brings up another good piece of advice is there is no one size fits all. As we discussed earlier, it's a discussion between two people. So you sort of got to be ready to adapt. Different methods will work with different people. Some people have different levels of understanding than other people. Sort of remember this, and instead of trying to use your little mold, like if you've been taught a sort of mold for how to do things, it's best to use that as a skeleton than as a speech. It's sort of the baseline thing. This helps you organize your own thoughts and put them in order so that you can put the flesh on it based on whatever that person wants to hear or needs to hear and that sort of thing. And another bit of advice for Christians is look at how Jesus did it. Look at how he spoke and taught to crowds using things. He had the parables for some people, the analogies. He had straight up lessons for others. He was practical with some. He was theoretical with others. And he was humble through, well, he was humble through most of it, and he was angry even at times with others when it warranted it. Like, we have the perfect example of how to spread our faith there in the man who literally is our faith. So use that, learn from that, and study that when you go to work out your own way of evangelizing to other people. Alright. And I suppose that's everything then. See you all
That's
later.
good.
Perfect.
Yep, sweet.
Thanks for the discussion.